Welcome to Nonprofit Nerd Impact Unleashed. Get ready to dive into the world of nonprofits, where the nerdy passion and unstoppable dedication of those making a real impact is celebrated. Together with your host, Jarrett Ransom, the inspiring stories and game-changing strategies of nonprofit leaders will be explored. Join us to unravel the mysteries of successful fundraising, uncover the secrets to effective advocacy, and nerd out over innovative approaches to solving social challenges. Nonprofit Nerd Impact Unleashed is your go-to podcast for no-nonsense discussions with real-life superheroes of the nonprofit sector. Get ready to unleash your inner nerdiness and discover or rediscover how to change the world together. Now let's dive in and embrace the power of our nerdy side.
Hey there, get ready to hear from someone that I consider a brother of mine. When we connected, I just immediately knew there was something special about this guy. I've really enjoyed watching his journey, his commitment to his faith, and how that shows up for him in his life and how he continues to make that a priority for him. Lots of travel, lots of coffee, lots of good stories. Go ahead and listen to Muhi Khwaja. Hear all of the roles that he plays and the different clients that he's working with around the world. And also special thanks to Fundraising Academy for being this season's sponsor. Thank you. Well, hey there, my friend Muhi. How are you today?
I'm doing well. How about yourself?
I am doing fantastic. Really excited to have you on as a guest. As I was sharing with you before we started the recording, season 1 was fantastic, and I've really hand selected so many amazing people that I admire and respect and really enjoy watching them live their life. And I just couldn't be more proud to have you on as a guest here to tell us a little bit about yourself. And I like to start this off by saying, when we live our life, there's so many things that we do between personal life, professional life. There's a lot of balls that we juggle, a lot of hats that we wear. And I like to start off by asking you, what are some of the names that you go by? How do people refer to you in this world with all of the balls and all of the hats that you wear?
Yeah, I guess one of the self-proclaimed titles, and maybe you'll appreciate this as the nonprofit nerd, was just Philanthropy Geek.
Yeah.
So all things philanthropy, just kind of living in that space, but really diving into it unknowingly from childhood activism of seeing my parents serve in their community, right? And it being modeled for me in that way. But aside from being a philanthropy geek, I also enjoy hiking. I also enjoy adventure and motorcycles, and traveling. So a little bit of everything in between. Yeah.
And tell us a little bit about, because I feel like I know you pretty well, and I've actually referred to you, and you've heard me say this before, like you were my lost brother. Like when I met you, I just felt this instant connection. I love watching your journey in life. Tell us a little bit about what you do for work, what you do for fun, because you have a couple of different professional roles that you play, and I would love for you to share about them.
Yeah, I mean, some may call me a coffee barista as well. I forgot to include that one earlier. Um, so the hats that I wear in terms of my profession, and I think we've talked one-on-one about just like ikigai and purpose of life and finding that, right? So some of the things that I have a skill set for, that I can be paid for, that I love doing, all are around development work, nonprofit fundraising, management. It's kind of been a great career from college internship at the University of Michigan called the Development Summer Internship Program. Now through my career, where I've been a chief development officer, I've been a one-person development team. I've kind of had a lot of different roles that have allowed me to start my own consulting business called Nonprofit Solutions. So that's something relatively new after moving to Florida that I settled here. And then through that, I do my work at the American Muslim Community Foundation, which is a nonprofit that I started back in 2017. We offer donor advised funds and endowments for the Muslim community. Then, in addition to that, some of the other consulting work that I do, I'm part of a capital campaign for a private school in Michigan called Crescent Academy. And they're in the silent phase right now, hoping to raise $20 million, of which we have $3 million committed and are working through the strategy before we publicly launch to hopefully get to 60%, if not more. And then I am with Fundraising Academy, which is how we collided in our worlds. So I'm a trainer there and so glad to be part of that team, as it just lends my skill set of training and best practices. So I'm on webinars, I'm on podcasts, I'm at conferences, just representing the Fundraising Academy team.
Holy cow, I am tired hearing all of these different roles. Congratulations on the consulting. I think I knew this was something you were doing, but this is really the first formal time I've heard it. So really exciting for you. I would love to go back to Ikigai, and you popped up. I just did a road trip from Utah to Arizona, and it was about 12 hours. I split it into 2 days. But I call that my cathartic time because I listen to audiobooks. And one of the books was, it's called Work Optional. And they definitely brought up Ikigai. And
Cool.
as soon as I hear that word, Muhi, I immediately think of you. I think of our conversation about Ikigai. I think of all of the posts that you make on Instagram and social media of your amazing travel. And yes, your coffee. I have to go back to the coffee too, because Pearl's on Pearl Hoagland from Fundraising Academy is also on season 2, and she is really perfecting her foam art on her lattes.
I still struggle. I can't. I try.
Yeah. Well,
it's abstract latte art for me.
Abstract is great. I mean, there's a lot of artists that have been, world renowned for abstract. But tell us a little bit about Ikigai for so many people that are like, what is this word? How do you even spell it? What does it mean? Right. And I'm not going to ask you to spell it, but like, what does that mean? And how does that show up for you in your life?
Yeah, it's a Japanese concept. And ideally, it's how you can combine your hobby with a vocation, with something that serves a purpose in the world and something that you can be paid for and that you love. So some people have hobbies, but they don't necessarily make a living off of it. Some people have a living, but they don't necessarily find happiness through it. So it's like, what is that perfect Venn diagram of all of those 4 things colliding? And that's what Ikigai is.
Yeah. And what about your travel? Because I think when we first met, you were, I'm going to say, a complete nomad. I loved it. I would say, well, where are you today, Muhi? Because we would join on Zoom and I had no idea in the world where you were. How long did you spend on the road? And what was really the impetus for that? What started it? What kept you on the road? What ended that? Tell us about that journey.
So pre-pandemic, I was working remotely since 2019. And after some lifestyle changes, I moved out on my own, went through divorce, and that kind of just propelled me into thinking, what do I really want to do? As it does for many people who go through that process. And New Year's Day 2022, I bought like 12 tickets, purchased flights, places I've always wanted to go. Luckily, I had, some miles from United and Delta and like pieced it all together. But I booked a trip to Turkey on points. I booked a trip to Alaska, to Hawaii, places I've always wanted to go. Egypt to see the pyramids. And then I knew I was going to be doing a 4-month stint through Central and South America through a travel group called Remote Year. And they really set up group travel for people who work remotely, essentially. So I had these individual trips set up. I had this group travel set up. And then when I did the group travel for 4 solid months, it was traveling with 21 other people from around the world for those 4 months, visiting 4 different countries. We went to Colombia, Guatemala, Peru, and Mexico. So after those 4 months, I was like, I really enjoy this and think I could do more. And my original idea was come back to the US and have a RV road trip all across the country. I'd bought one, and while I was gone, unfortunately, it got vandalized and stolen.
Yeah.
So had to reset that idea, but it allowed me to say, okay, I'm gonna travel Europe and Asia for 7 months. And that's exactly what I did. When I came back from those 4 months of travel, I caught up with family for a month and a half, and then I started on my journey from November 2020. I'm doing the math now, November 2022 to May of 2023. I traveled again, and challenging with work hours on that side of the world. So that was definitely something. Unreliable, or not knowing the reliability of internet connection, also another thing. But luckily, I didn't run into too many issues, and was able to make it work. It was just like sacrificing sleep schedule, not necessarily the amount of sleep, but I could be out and about until like 10 p.m. and then come back and work from like 11 to 4 a.m. and then sleep until like 10 a.m. and then, have a somewhat of a normal schedule.
Wow. That sounds challenging and so rewarding at the same time. I want to go into stress, burnout, anxiety. Like, let's go into emotions. And I'm really curious because you have lived this remote experience and traveled across the world. And thank you for sharing. And now you are settled into one location in Florida. How have your, I think, just for the lack of a better terms, like emotions and regulations, like, did you see them differently on the road versus in one, dedicated location? How did that show up for you?
Well, it's reminding yourself that it's not a permanent vacation. It's still a life that you have to be reasonable and do work and make it happen. And you can't escape the emotions either, right? Like, I battled through some depression bouts even on my travels, and was talking to a therapist in between. And those things seeped into my relationships with family, and now with my significant other. So, you know, it's a good reminder that your mental health should always come first, your physical health should always come first, and then the work after that, after the relationships, right? Like, you always hear about things that people on their deathbed say they wish they did differently. And it's usually focused around relationship, focused around health. Nobody's ever talking about wishing they worked harder. Um,
No, I've never heard
so,
that either. Yeah.
but the idea being like, now I'm in Tampa, Florida. My fiance wife is in grad school here. So we came here to be closer to her needs and just kind of be here for a few years. But in the summer, during her off season, we're hoping to go to Central and South America. So that's like the exciting part, is like, yes, I can be in one place, but I really want to be everywhere.
Yeah.
So, working on that balance, and that's also part of the struggle in communicating that, and how that plays out. If I'm not communicating it, it turns out in my actions, right? And being cognizant of that. But I think being in Florida has its benefits. I grew up in Michigan. I lived in San Francisco Bay Area for 10 years. Then I traveled for about a year and a half. But Florida will be interesting. And I'm glad that we get to escape the summer by traveling to other places because it's just egregiously hot here and humid.
Yeah.
So
Well, don't come here because I'm in Phoenix, obviously. So it's not a good time for us
the
to
dry heat. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a dry heat. That home swap, though, it's still not a good idea for us.
Right.
So co-founder of the American Muslim Community Foundation, and knowing you, I also know that your faith is very important to you, which I admire. And again, something that I really enjoy watching you share so publicly. How does your faith play a part, and what I would think a significant part of your life when it comes to managing everything, as well as I want to say thank you for being so open and sharing about your own depression, even while you were traveling. How does your faith play a role in what you do?
Yeah. There's ever since childhood, like my identity was that. Like my parents were at the mosque multiple times a week at different functions and gatherings and potlucks and spiritual things as well. So for me, it was always part of who I am. In terms of my own journey with my own faith, like, sure, like high school Muhi and college Muhi and postgraduate life Muhi are all at different phases of religiosity and kind of learning the faith and identifying with it and coming to terms with it. And even today, like, more recently, we just finished Ramadan. So having almost like a spiritual high, but also in the mental health space, like there's a lot more resources combining religion and mental health in the Muslim community. So it's really neat to see those worlds combine. And it's not that these things hadn't been talked about previously. There's like historical research on the influence of Islam in mental health, dating, centuries back. So it's interesting to see how it's implemented here. But what I will say, oftentimes, the cultural practice of a religion may be different than the religious practice of it, right? So I've even talked to Irish Catholic friends, and their experience with religion is very different than other Christians or people of other faith. But
Yeah.
in our community, we also talk about spiritual bypassing, like, oh, just rely on God more, but no, that, yes, have a sense of reliance on God, but beyond that, you have to do X, Y, and Z.
Mm-hmm.
And what is X, Y, and Z for each and every person? That may be different. It could be talking to uh, a counselor. It could be talking to more honestly with yourself. It could be a whole host of different things. So really looking at like the aspect of religion in who I am professionally, spiritually, on a day-to-day basis. Like, I love going to concerts and electronic music, and that's a big part of myself, just as is the coffee and the travel. And how do I balance my faith with all of that? And people see this professional side of me through AMCF, and helping families distribute their zakat and sadaqah, which are like religiously mandated almsgiving. So like I have a very lane that I can find myself in, but there's so many lanes to who I am as an individual as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I've never heard spiritual bypassing. That was new to me. So I'm going to have to spend some time researching that and learn more about it.
Sure. Yeah, no, it's some term that I picked up when I was at an organization called Tetleaf Collective. And I was their one person development team, but they offered more socially conscious, religiously aware educational platforms for youth and young adults for learning Islam.
Very cool. Well, I always love learning, lifelong learner, right? And so it's like, well, what
Yeah.
else can I dabble in and learn more about? I'd love to ask you about self-care, relaxation. What are some of the things that when you find yourself a little dysregulated or feeling overwhelmed with, because I heard you say you're living in Tampa, but you're doing a capital campaign in Michigan, so that's
Yeah.
several states away. What do you do to manage, the self-care that you need, maybe even find some relaxation while you're traveling and working in multiple states? How does that support you?
Yeah, I think Michigan always has a sense of home because I was raised there. So I go back every few months to touch base with not only with the project, but also family. And I think that's very grounding for me. And, family can be family. And there's always that aspect to it too. Take it however you want. I'm not saying anything specific. But it allows me to come back with a sense of appreciation. Like Michigan and the community I grew up in has just been such a foundation for me. That spending the last week of Ramadan there and also just having time with nieces and nephews was such a blessing. And I think that is one method of self care that I will choose to continue to employ. The others on the day-to-day basis really is the coffee making and the motorcycle ride here and there, and those sorts of things that get me through the week. Some yoga practice, and even with the praying 5 times a day, like trying to stick to that and having that moment of clarity and connection. So those are a few of the different ways in which I try to stay um, grounded and more self-connected with what I need from a physical standpoint, from a spiritual standpoint, from emotional standpoint, and kind of weaving that all together now being in a relationship with my partner as well. So
Yeah. Wow. It's just so amazing. And I chuckled. I know this is a podcast, so not many people are going to see it unless you watch the YouTube version. But when you mentioned family and I chuckled, I'm like, oh yes, because my family's in South Carolina. And I'm like, I love them dearly from 3,000 miles away. Although I'm very close with them. I talk to my
yeah.
mom almost daily. And got a great group of friends and I can resonate so much. Like your Michigan is my South Carolina. And when
Yeah.
I go home, it has this feeling of home. It has comfort of home. It has a little bit for me, uneasiness because I have left home for so many years now. And so
Mhm.
it's still got a couple of like, I don't know, zings for me that's like, ooh, that's not how I do it anymore, which is a little
Sure.
different. But I can resonate with that. And to hear you talk about Michigan and your community, like what an honor to also be able to continue to support and strengthen your community that you grew up in and spent so much time in, but that's not your permanent residence today. And that's just what an honor for that. That must be very cool.
Yeah, definitely. The capital campaign project is close to home too, so it's a great way to give back. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, very cool. Okay. I would be remiss if I didn't ask you this question in particular. When is your next vacation? Where are you going? What's the passport stamp look like? Right? Like,
Yeah.
what's that thing that you're looking forward to?
So Athia's grad school semester finishes May 2nd.
Ooh, that's
Um,
soon.
so on May 8th, we have a flight to Costa Rica. So we have like the first 5 days planned, but once you arrive to a country, you have to kind of have an exit strategy because they don't want you staying there forever. So we have a few things to figure out, but we know we want to go to Peru because she wants to see Machu Picchu, and I don't mind going back again. And we also want to visit Brazil for Christ the Redeemer. So wonders of the world are a big thing for me. Like I want to check them all off the list.
Mhm.
And we'll probably add 1 or 2 countries in between, but the idea is to be gone for 2 months.
Yeah. Oh, that's so special. What a wonderful time. And again, a great time to be out of Florida.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, Muhi Khwaja, thank you. I consider you a dear, special friend of mine. Thank you for opening up and sharing about yourself personally and in this intimate way with so many of our listeners. I really took this on because I had a craving for real talk. I had a craving for more authentic conversations because as we're out doing so much good in the world, I found myself like taking it home and keeping me up at night, of course, like what else can I do? And so I just love connecting in these authentic ways with people like yourself. So thank you. I really appreciate you joining me today.
Yeah, the pleasure was mine, and can't wait to connect at the Fundraising Academy Cultivate conference. So
Yes, it's
looking
coming
forward
up
to seeing you in
soon.
person too.
Yes, I cannot wait for that. And then for all of the connections, anyone who's looking to connect with you more, your consulting, your American Muslim Community Foundation, Fundraising Academy is a sponsor of this season. Thank you so much. Where is the best way to connect with you?
I'd say LinkedIn, just on the connection note, say you heard me on the podcast, and we'll stay in touch.
Love it. Well, thank you so much and have a wonderful trip. I can't wait to hear about it.
Thank you so much.